Monotype.
Welcome to Creative Characters from Monotype, the show where we meet the people working at the intersection of type and everyday life. I'm your host, Carl, and today we're digging into the Creative Characters archives to bring you an episode from Season 1. In this episode, we have our own Charles Nix sitting down with James Edmondson, the proprietor, founder, owner, mad scientist / California guy behind Ohno Type Company. Ohno is one of my personal favorite type foundries. James has a really distinctive approach to type design. You know an Ohno font when you see one. He loves to push the limits of legibility, play with forms and shapes and soft corners and all sorts of elements that give his typefaces a unique and memorable appearance. They work great in sort of large scale display uses, but then some of his fonts like Degular and Retail are just total powerhouses that you can use all over the place. I use his typefaces in a lot of my own stuff outside of work, and just a really eclectic and vibrant library of typefaces that can be used for so many different things. In addition, I saw him speak at Adobe Max, and he gave one of the most personal, intimate, and vulnerable talks about life and creativity that you could really ever hope to hear. And it's really stuck with me since then, as he sort of went in depth about some of the things he'd gone through in his life with his family and how it informed his creative practice and his approach to type design as a business. So just an all-around great guy and a luminary in the type design field, which is a title that might make him uncomfortable. Sorry. We also wanted to re-air this episode because James has a book coming out this October, and we wanted to encourage our audience to go give it a look. The book is called A Serious Guide to Irreverent Type Design. It comes out on October 14th and will be available everywhere. So we highly suggest you go to bookshop.org, not the other place that rhymes with Scamazon, and put in a pre-order or speak to your local bookshop and see if they'll have it in. So with that, I'm going to kick it back to Charles and James, who sat down in the fuzzy pandemic era year of 2021. Hope you enjoy.
I'm Charles Nix, Creative Type Director at Monotype, and it is my great pleasure today to talk to James Edmondson, somebody who I met through his typefaces, which I think is probably one of the greatest ways to meet people. James, welcome aboard.
Is meeting someone through their typefaces really the greatest way to meet people?
I think it is like, well, no, maybe you're right. Maybe it is like, don't meet your heroes kind of.
No, not, well, I mean, that's kind of an interesting thing. What is people's relationship to the body of work that they create? I think for some people, it's like, it's one thing. And then for other people, it can just be completely separate things. Like the most austere modernist could be a total asshole, which is probably like getting away from the point of modernism, which was like communicating clearly. I don't know. Maybe I'm going down a whole other rabbit hole. And not all modernists are assholes. That's not what I'm saying.
I don't think that's probably in your character to sort of paint all people with a broad brush like that. Let's paint a picture of your character, though. Before we got on today, I wanted to ask some sort of like probing questions about where you came from and who made you. And I think you volunteered that, or you hoped that your dad would stop by to sort of fill out that picture.
Yeah, great guy.
So let's talk about your parents, your family, where you grew up, what your early years were like.
Yeah, so I have 5 older brothers. I'm the youngest of 6 boys, which is kind of a weird thing. My mom desperately wanted a girl, and they just kept on trying until every one of their family members stepped in and was like, you guys got to stop having kids. This is not a good idea anymore. My dad was a teacher. My mom was at home, and they were pretty strapped for cash in the early days. Like before I was born, more so. My older brothers talked a lot about how like coming home and seeing Oreos in the kitchen was like a huge deal. Like that meant that something amazing had happened, you know. By the time I was growing up, I think my parents were a little bit better off. They like inherited a house from my mom's mom, and so it was a little bit more chill for most of my childhood. Like I don't remember money being that much of an issue, but it's not like we were the family that was like going on vacations to Hawaii or anything like that. We would always go to Sequoia National Park in California, and we would do the same vacation every year. It wasn't until I grew up that I realized that families went on different vacations every year. But it was a very nice childhood for me. I would say it's like a classic California kind of childhood. I played a lot of Lego as a small kid and got very comfortable just hanging out by myself for hours and hours and just doing the independent play. And I think what I do now is exactly the same thing as that. And, you know, having 5 older brothers has been excellent too. They all run the whole gamut, like every kind of different person is in our family. No one else went to art school. They all have kind of varied interests and stuff, but they're all pretty bright, I'd say. And they're all funny. So I think a lot of boys in the family, like you're going to get ripped on a lot. So your skin is probably going to get a little thicker than normal, which I think for me was a good thing. It certainly helped prepare me for art school, entering like the critique world and stuff like that.
So what was high school like? How did you sort of fix in your mind being the only one from your family that went to art school? How did that become a thing for you?
I mean, that came way later. High school was like, I had no confidence, super shy and insecure. I'm very tall now. Everyone in my family is tall, but I didn't get tall until I was like 18. I probably went through puberty when I was like 25 years old or something like that. So high school was kind of a rough time socially. I just felt like I was in there with a bunch of like 30-year-olds, you know. Girls were not really giving me the time of day back then. And they continued to not do that probably until my mid-20s. So it was a little bit rough. I definitely remember feeling very, very young and very out of place. Like art school was not on my radar at all. Like that was not a thing that anyone did in my family, but it was also just, I didn't know anyone who did that. We were from a kind of a small town, and anything related to the arts or interesting parts of culture, it was just like not even available. Like I remember I got a Mac, like an iMac computer when I was like 17. And the manual for the Mac was the first piece of like, quote unquote, good typography that I had seen. It's a manual, like it's not going to win any design awards, but at the same time, you know, the Apple ones, they put some love and stuff into that type. And I remember just thinking like, oh, wow, like this is incredible. And what is this thing? Since growing up, I'm not so impressed by like professional looking typography anymore. And I'm more drawn to the other things that were around my childhood, you know, different signs that I grew up with or just random things from like whatever Mexican restaurant in Oceano, the kind of neighboring city. And the first couple attempts at college, I went to Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, which was like 20 minutes away. And it was a decent school, but I was there for graphic communication, which was not creative at all. It was not a design education at all. It was only about the technical aspects of printing. There was barely a little bit of web design stuff in that curriculum. So we were just talking about the opacity of ink and the tensile strength of paper and all this stuff where I was like basically training myself to work at Dunder Mifflin, like a real life version of Dunder Mifflin. And it seems like I kind of dodged a bullet looking back on it, but I think I kind of had to use that as a stepping stone before I felt like I had the confidence to go into a real art school because I was nowhere near ready coming out of high school.
So you did how many years at Poly?
Like 2, and I made 0 friends.
Well, when I was a little kid, my father was a printer. All of that sort of like nuts and bolts aspect of of design and graphic production was part of my childhood.
Wow, yeah.
But how do you even end up in a graphic arts program 2 years out of high school or a year out of high school?
I don't know. I knew that Cal Poly was a school that I had a shot at getting into because they admitted students for the summer. I knew I couldn't get in for fall, but if I had agreed to start going to college at the summer after my senior year, then I had a shot at getting in. And if not Poly, it was going to be like San Diego State or Chico or something like that. So yeah, I just knew that was kind of something that I was interested in, and it seemed doable. Once I was in, I knew it wasn't like a great fit, and I ended up taking a year off. My brother Paul actually started a startup web company in San Francisco when I was like 19, and I went up to intern with him for the summer. And as soon as I got to San Francisco, I was pretty much like, yeah, I like this more. I don't feel any need to go back to Cal Poly. I had to like ask my parents if it was okay to stop going to my college, kind of like with this unknown. I had no idea if I was going to go back, basically. So I started working for my brother Paul, and then I just started working for him straight up, like as a profession, as a web designer, doing all these things that I more or less taught myself. And I was doing a lot of PowerPoint presentations. Like PowerPoint was a huge part of my life for years. And it's crazy to think about that now because it's not fun.
No, it's sort of like a prison.
Yeah. And to do anything good in PowerPoint, it's like impossible. But I did so many different decks. He was trying to get funding for his startup at that point. And so there was always a different investor presentation to make. Looking back on it, is probably good, hardcore, basic typography training. And I guess I got so burned out on it that I wanted to see what else was out there in graphic design. I was dating a girl at the time, and her sister went to CCA, California College of the Arts in San Francisco. And it's a really great school, I think. There's a lot of amazing teachers there. I just signed up like sight unseen. I knew nothing about. I had one catalog that they sent me in the mail about it, and the catalog looked cool. And I found out later it was designed by Bob Offeldish, who was the teacher there later in the program. And I was like, I guess I'll give this a shot. But I definitely didn't even think that I was going to graduate. It was just like, yeah, we'll see what it's like. Because the girl I was dating, whose sister was going there, she was like, yeah, I think you would really like it. And the other graphic design work that I see from my friends there is like pretty cool. So give it a shot. And I was like, okay. I think I've made a lot of decisions in my life by just kind of like, okay, kind of going in this direction. So let's see where it goes kind of thing. It was not expertly designed or planned at all. It was just kind of random that I ended up at CCA.
So from there, did the sort of idea, even the sort of inkling of designing type or spending the rest of your days working in graphic design and graphic arts come to you?
No, I was all in on graphic design. Around that time, this was like 2007, there was this website called FontStruct. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. So it was like a web tool that allowed you to make pixel fonts. I was all about that. That was like the coolest thing in the world to me at that time. And I didn't do anything especially cool with it, but I just knew that I was stoked on designing type. But there was just, I knew nothing about it, you know. I remember when I signed up for my first typography class, like in my typography class, I was like, man, I wish I could learn how to like stack up type and justify it, full justifications, and know how much to overshoot in certain places and where to keep it on the guide, just so I can get what looks like a straight line. Like that was my whole goal for the semester in typography 1, is kind of thinking about those things. And then when we started, we immediately began having those conversations exactly about all these like optical things that you do to make things kind of look right, even though it's not going to be totally on the guide every time. My teacher, Angie Wang, for that class was the best person ever. I adore Angie, and we've become friends since I kind of graduated and stuff. But I remember getting on the bus after that class and just like, I couldn't help but smile because we were talking about exactly the stuff I wanted to be learning. And I just like couldn't contain my enthusiasm for it. It's kind of funny to think about that now, but I just knew I was in the right spot and just wanted to keep going.
It's so wild. I think the same thing about my first typography class. And I was in New York studying at Cooper Union, but I have friends at Pratt, and they were going through the same thing. Like suddenly it's like this weird veil is lifted. You have like the sort of enthusiasm of a religious convert. You walk out and see the world in a different way. It's just
totally.
I think we all need to pour out like a little drop for every Type 1 instructor who's had that impact on us, because it's astounding.
And that is a hard job to do that curriculum over and over and just start from scratch every semester with a new crop of students is so hard. To run the tape and say those things that you've said a million times, but to do it in a way that's fresh and will still resonate and doesn't sound like this stale thing that you're just repeating, that's really hard. And Angie was so good at it.
Well, the students change. And I mean, I imagine when somebody like you is in a class like that, it's a very different thing than the version of you or the not version of you from the year before was in there. It's like the material might be the same, but the reaction that you get, it's like performing in a band. Like,
right.
The concert we did in Rio was fantastic, but the one at Madison Square Garden was really dead. Same material. But yeah, that aspect of it. And I think after, a decade or two in teaching, I had that same sort of like, wow, I can't believe I've been doing this so long and I still really enjoy it. But it has everything to do with the fact that the people you're talking to are having that moment that you and I had, that moment of like, oh, you walk out of the class and suddenly you're trying to figure out what typeface that is, or like the way that it's working or not working. It's all a new thing. And that level of sort of watching people see for the first time is just spectacular.
And now I'm getting into a teaching thing where I'm like, I like the one-on-one thing, just like one person for a year or 2 years, or just like an apprentice sort of relationship, whether they're doing apprentice work or working on their own stuff, doesn't matter. But it's just like the more you can kind of use a cumulative effort and not start from scratch has been a really rewarding experience for me recently.
Just yesterday with the Creative Pro crew about that process of learning kerning. And I tried to do like a tutorial, like just sort of show them a fundamental method of kerning, that 3-letter method of like, take these 3, then do 2, 3, 4, then do 3, 4, 5. And one of the participants said, I've never seen anyone actually use it, like do it in front of me. Like I've heard about the method, I've read about it, but I've never actually seen somebody kern a word.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, it works for me because I don't really depend on that method. I've been doing this for 30 years. I know how to kern a word, so I can see it really, really quickly and sort of diagnose what needs to be done. But there was a time when it was about my mentor standing over my shoulder and I had letters on a board and I was pushing them this way and that. And he would say, that's good. That's too tight. Move the T over. And it's that I think what you're describing in terms of apprenticeship, that's sort of like he didn't have to be over my shoulder 24 hours a day or even 3 hours a day. But those 15 minutes, just having access to somebody who could sort of help you through the thing that you were working through at that moment is really, it's what schools of painting were about.
Well, it's just efficient. It's just like faster,
super efficient,
basically.
Yeah.
Like I notice that now when I'm really interested in woodworking now, and I'm a total beginner in it, and that's what's fun for me right now is to just like start from scratch with this and learn it from the ground up. I think my skills are around like an 8th grader taking shop for the first time, you know? But I'm loving it, but it's hard. It's a lot of banging your head against the wall because I don't have that relationship of like a mentor that I can just go to really quick and say like, hey, what's wrong with this? And so I'm really, I think, starting to appreciate how useful that can actually be. And people learn different ways. And I think I've kind of fed myself the lie that I am someone who teaches themselves stuff, you know, and that's kind of where I'm most comfortable. But it's not really true. I think I totally learned the most like in grad school when I was just getting education every direction from my fellow students and from like this incredible roster of teachers just constantly, you know, 24 hours a day, there's stuff that you're learning.
From your undergrad to your grad. So actually learning type design in an environment with other people or learning type design. We just talked about teaching as a sort of tangent, but that process for you, that sort of pattern making of being surrounded by talented people, driven people, and being guided by incredible luminaries in the design field, type design field. Mm-hmm. That's a special cauldron.
Oh, yeah.
So where did you go?
It was a school called Type Media in The Hague, Netherlands. And in my head, I think of it as Hogwarts for type design. I don't know if I'm the only one who thinks of it that way, but it's a total fluke, a stroke of luck that I ended up there because they admit such a small amount of people every year. And when I look back on the portfolio that I applied with, I'm like, all right, let's be honest here. It was luck that I got in there for sure. And it was a really hard year too, emotionally. I was dating a girl in San Francisco at that time, and I found out she was cheating on me while I was in school. I was like dealing with all that stuff. And I also found it hard to connect to other Dutch people. I, of course, was really tight with all of my friends in school, but I was not like doing the cool travel on the weekends to other European destinations or like having fun or drinking or going out and partying. Like it was fully school all the time. And that was shared between us all. You know, we were all like, okay, we've been given this thing. How do we really take it and run with it? So it was an incredible year. I learned a ton. I made a bunch of lifelong friends and mentors, especially Eric Van Blockland is a person who is in my head on a daily basis, you know, can hear him saying things about spacing and stuff like that. But I think the general thing that you learn in a lot of different schools is everything's harder than you think it is in the beginning. Everything takes longer. And so you start to see this relationship between patience and quality really pretty quickly. And that can hurt you too. And I've seen it hurt a lot of type designers who are so hell-bent on perfection that they like then can't release anything. But then when it keeps you from moving forward or finishing something or whatever, you know, then it can kind of be a bummer and stuff. So yeah, it was a lot of broad lessons, life lessons, design lessons, separate from the kind of hardcore typography education.
I listened to your Ohno radio podcast and the Q&A episode in particular, and I believe there was a point where you're talking about future fonts and this idea, maybe with some other note about imperfections in final releases and your very non-precious approach to releasing, knowing that there may be a problem with it, but knowing that it's more important that it get out there and that if there's something really wrong with it, you can fix it later. It speaks directly to that idea of like seeking perfection and then never getting the thing into the hands of the people who actually want it or need it or want to use it.
I think problems can be fixed, like most of the time. We have it in our heads that typefaces are immovable things or they get released and then nothing ever happens. But that's not really true. You know, people are doing character set extensions all the time, fixing technical things all the time. And I just know that it's impossible for me to do something perfect. It's not gonna happen. So I will absolutely do my best, like I'm always gonna give it all I got. And know that there will be other things in the future. Like maybe there's teachers of mine that would cringe to hear that or see some of the work that I've actually released that are like, ooh, dude, not so much love in how you drew this eth or whatever, But for me and my own happiness and how I define my version of success, it's good to just get it out there. Like better done than perfect.
Well, I wondered that, like when you mentioned the variable version of Chee and even Hobo Rococo, did I say that correctly?
Oh, you nailed it.
Thank you. I'm a Hobo fan from way back. I've got Hobo Monotype actually. Yeah. That much of a type nerd. But when I looked at them, I love in all of your work actually, and the promotional graphics for it too, the sense of immediacy in it, the sense that you've captured the essence of what it is that you wanted to say through the type or through the form. But at the same time, I was wondering, if I looked at these really close, like if I got down into the innards of them and looked at the way that the handles and the points were placed, I would imagine there's a certain amount of rigor in what you do, but to what degree does it sort of adhere to a level of perfection of form, and to what degree do you just let things go?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if I've really thought too much about the answer. So like with Chee, that's kind of an interesting one, because to me, it was more important that it be a variable font and then have these two different axes that are working together in an interesting way. To make that happen technically, I had to put some points in some weird places and do some kind of technically questionable things. But that's the point of the typeface, is that it does those things and that it morphs and breathes in that way. I hope that you could zoom into Hobo, any glyph in there, and it's going to look like a technically sound glyph at any scale. I really hope that's true. I'm not 1,000% sure, but I've had the experience of really zooming in on people's work and being like, okay, that's not so perfect right here. But yeah, everyone has a kind of different level of visual completeness that they're happy with. And I think for my fonts, they're mostly display fonts, so display stuff gets blown up big. I think everything in my library can get blown up and is gonna look good. That's an important part of it for me. Where I kind of back off on the effort is like an over-the-top extended character set, really obscure punctuation. Like I leave that stuff out, and I've gotten no complaints that my typefaces don't have a florin in them or a generic currency symbol or these things that you really only include so that it would have the same character set as something else. It's not really related to the use of the typeface a lot of times. So I streamline it quite a bit.
And that makes a lot of sense to me, because I was mentioning that to Juan Villanova, who designs at Monotype, just this morning. And that's
love Juan. Just gotta give a quick shout out to Juan. What a great guy and what a great asset to the type community.
But we were talking about kerning characters that don't need kerns, and I said, we spend a lot of time on things like you just mentioned, a florin that may or may not, florins actually. It has greater chance of being used, but anymore probably not that great of a chance of being used. But nonetheless, like things like a moo, which nobody needs. Like nobody's using it. Like nobody needs a Hobo Rococo moo.
No, you won't find it.
Yeah. And I said, we do these things to be completists, but it's sort of like painting the tops of beams in churches so that God can see them. It just like doesn't make any practical sense to do it. And it sort of speaks to probably a larger aspect of your personality, not this sort of like insane character extension, interior war that people tend to engage in, but instead sort of say like, this is the time that I have to give to this or want to give to this. This is the way that I think people will use it. And I'm going to be very sort of direct about what I put into it.
Yeah, it's just like, what is the type trying to do? And I think the goals for a useful display font are pretty attainable. How I see my fonts being used 99.9% of the time is very straightforward. And what I've been noticing is some people just use my demo fonts, and I'll notice that like my demo fonts have A to Z upper lower numbers and a period, a comma, and a hyphen. It's just like the most bare bones, and a space, the most bare bones character set ever. And you know what? They're still pretty useful, and you still see them used, and people use them, and then like the exclamation point from Myriad will show up in there, you know, and that'll be the dead giveaway that they're using the demos. But it just goes to show you like at what stage in the process a typeface becomes useful. And I think that's how that's a reason for the success of future fonts is they kind of realize that and capitalize on it in a unique way. I mean, that's just one part of why it works, but it's something to take note of and to have in your mind when you're on your second day of drawing your section symbol. You know, I think I've seen section symbols in use that I've drawn, but they're few and far between, you know, and they're hard to draw, and they take a little bit of love, like the italics. Ooh, very, very tricky to get that right.
And doing it and then, you know, having to do it in a second master is always just like, that's the soul crusher. It's like, oh, I did this already.
Right. and then in your ninth master, and then you're doing your alternate section, and then you're like, okay, this has got to fucking stop immediately.
When I was a tiny child, I had a career in book design. And so, and there, like where those kind of symbols come into play, you'd have to have an editor who insisted on using archaic reference symbols. No, we're not using footnotes. We're going to do reference symbols.
With all that said, though, I still like drawing that stuff, and I still like having it there, and I like using it in the marketing materials and stuff. And any time I can really make like a typographically rich page, you know, like showing all these different things together, like it can help paint a cool view of the typeface. And I don't hate the work. Like I still enjoy the work, trying to get a section marker, just forgetting for a minute how useless it is as a pursuit on a scale, you know. It's still like, I still like the work, and it doesn't really matter even what genre I'm in. I liked working on it in Degular as much as Chee or whatever, you know. So like,
well, it's much more important in a typeface like Degular that you sort of you really hit that sort of usability aspect much more squarely with Degular than
right.
I mean, Chee's usable. Of course it's usable. But I always say there's this concept from biology of charismatic megafauna, like the eagles and the bears and and all these animals that are so big that we lavish our attention on them. And meanwhile, the majority of the biomass on the planet is insects. And that is display typography and text typography in a nutshell. It's like, everybody wants the Chee, but the Degular is the thing you actually have to have. I mean,
well, it's also the thing that actually sells. You know, Degular is probably making up like 30% of our Foundry's income right now, which is bonkers to me because we went for 5 years without having a Degular, and I was like, something's missing here. So, anyways, it was kind of a journey in itself just to be okay with working on something like that and thinking about how a corporate low contrast grotesque sans would even fit in our library at all. You know, like, does that immediately make me a hypocrite? So that was a bit of a personal struggle.
Well, you seem to find some joy in it, like you said before. Like the work itself is always, it at least has a meditative quality, if not a joyful quality on a sort of fundamental level as creative people. But you seem to have imbued the forms with some sort of joy and some sort of moment of true connection for you and your aesthetic and ethos.
It's more of a thing where I'm just like trying to do the thing closest to Helvetica that I could possibly draw. And it ends up being something else. But that was my original impulse, to be honest.
No, and I've been on the other side of that equation, trying to draw Helvetica as Helvetica. And I find, I mean, the the sort of you kids get off my yard kind of approach that a lot of people had when I touched the micro version of Helvetica and sort of tried to introduce something that wasn't sort of patently Helvetica, but was different. It wasn't an attempt, obviously, to make something of my own. It was to make Helvetica that would work at really small sizes. But the very act of trying to recreate something from the past is almost impossible. Even if you're trying desperately to make an exact replica, it's really difficult through your own hands to make a replica.
Yeah, for me, it's not that fun. It's so hard. And I was having this conversation a couple of days ago with students. Someone was asking me, like, at what point in the process, when something is kind of getting away from you and getting away from the original theme that you were trying to work in, or the original genre or idea that you had at the outset, at what point do you try and correct, or do you just kind of let it be the thing that it then wants to become? And I think it's a lot more fun for me if it becomes the thing that it wants to become, and I don't try and keep like a stranglehold over it as it's kind of developing in its infancy. So that way, what will come out of it is something that feels hopefully new or unique in some way. And it's its own kind of living entity. Like, that's such a fun thing. I've taught classes that are like intro to calligraphy classes, or like very bare bones lettering classes. And I've taught like psychedelic lettering classes. And the psychedelic lettering classes are a lot more fun to teach because the students end up with stuff that they didn't know that they were going to work on. I didn't know what they were going to work on. And you still have the rigor in it. Like, it's not like you get to throw out every rule in the book. It's still based in some history and convention, but the results can just be a little bit surprising. So I love taking the opportunity to indulge in a little bit of that.
To sort of turn both sides of your coin. If we take the Degular Chee as sort of two sides of the Ohno coin, or the James Edmondson coin, and say, like, one is a conscious effort to try and do something that's sort of middle of the road, that sort of has a sort of not workmanlike, but very utilitarian aspect to it. And the other is more of an expressive model of what typography can be. They're almost like the calligraphy versus
psychedelic lettering workshop.
Lettering, thank you. Mm-hmm. But when I think of a calligraphy workshop and you give somebody the exact form that they're supposed to do, it becomes them.
Yeah.
It's harder to see how the bark on the tree is different than the one next to it.
Yeah, and if you're taking like a foundational hand, or just like the bare bones calligraphy hands that are as basic and fundamental as possible, the way a beginner will make it their own is different than the way that a pro will make it their own. So that's a kind of fun thing to think about if we're just like looking at calligraphy. With Chee, I don't think is like an original design. Like, that's definitely not trying to do anything contemporary. It's just trying to fit a couple of different members from the 70s typographic landscape into the same design space file and have them interpolate. As a type designer, you'll look at all these different things and be like, oh, these two fonts could interpolate. Like, why shouldn't they do that? That would be cool if they could, or they did. So that was all I was trying to do there.
Yeah, it's the input though. It's like, I heard you talk to Mark Simonson, and Mark was talking about Proxima Nova and how he looked at Helvetica and Futura and thought, there's got to be a middle ground.
Mark, I love Mark.
I mean, other people have done it too, but they do it a little more ham-handedly. But I like that sort of like, I'm going to hit the ball out of the park. I'm going to take two really popular forms and mix them together. But I love the idea of like looking in the photo lettering ink catalog and finding something like Barnum and mixing it with like, whatever, like teardrop, and coming up with something unexpected. Like, why would you put those ingredients together?
The hybrid thing always works, and I think you see it across all sorts of disciplines. It's a fun thing to teach in workshops too. That's an exercise that we do. I wrote a Drawbot script that just pairs random images from my image library, things I save, with a random like system font, and have students create hybrids based on that. It's always wild what they end up with. And I love this idea that you can start with the dumbest idea or the worst recipe ever and just based on how you execute it, it can come out great or terrible. There's this comedian, Eric Andre. I was listening to him being interviewed by Conan O'Brien, and he says his favorite thing is when he gets the smartest comedy writers he knows, just like the people that are on a whole other level, like genius writers, and gives them the absolute dumbest, most immature idea, and then they begin there, and a lot of interesting things can happen that way, but of course, it's all about the execution. And so I love starting with dumb ideas like that. Like how do we make these two things interpolate? Or what happens when you make a hybrid of Carlisle Rococo and Hobo, or, whatever it is.
So, I mean, some of those things obviously have made it into your public offerings, but we all are, as type designers, have folders full of things that we sort of start on. And it is that sort of like, is it now? Is now the time to take this folder and bring it to some other place? Or is it when I find it 2 years from now and think like, oh, I should have finished that? So what do you have lurking in your folders that you're definitely not going to get back to? Funny things or things that you're dying to get back to?
I think in like 2018, I just finished up everything that I was working on. We had a baby that year, and I had a real kind of driving force to actually turn my company into a profitable business entity. So I released a ton of stuff that was exactly that stuff. It's like, oh, these are all the things I kind of meant to get around to. The things that are kind of lurking on my hard drive now are so far from complete that I'm kind of overwhelmed sometimes with the amount of work and the amount of time that they would require. There's also this thing that now that I know that Degular is making up 30% of our income, I'm like, well, it's time to make another Degular, because it just makes sense. The library is still so heavily skewed in these things that aren't really useful to designers on a multitude of projects. Like, I got to be honest with myself here. I've gotten the feedback a lot that people want to use Ohno fonts on more than one project and right. Stuff like that. And I still think that there's room in the landscape. It is so saturated, but I think there's still room for interesting things that can work in a corporate context. And I think there always will be. I think it's just like music or songwriting. There are so many great pop songs about love, and there always will be more, and there will always be a hunger for it, because that's the thing that everyone wants. And I think in type, it's very much the same. Like, people have spoken, and what they want are low contrast sans, and so we got to give them the best ones that we can. So there's at least an option to, no offense, not go with Helvetica if people don't want to. But hey, anyways, the things that are kicking around right now is like this one kind of humanist thing with an optical size axis. I'm kind of excited about that because I think it's fun. There's like kind of this weird reverse contrast casual that feels a little bit more contemporary to me, which is exciting because I don't want to just like hammer this 70s genre to death. I want that to kind of just exist on its own for a while and to get out of mining in that part of history for a second. I'm always interested in the variable thing, though. Like, the different ways we can approach variable axes was interesting to me with Chee and is still totally interesting. And we haven't really tapped into that potential nearly as much as we could. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, I like that there are 5 defined axes and 2 of them are the same. So there's really only like 4 defined axes, and then we've all worked through all of the things that we want to do with width and weight. But then you have unlimited things like yeast.
Yeah. Yeast or grit or fuzz or chillness or temperature. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It's so cool that you can write your own.
Who else do you look at or have looked at in the past who sort of informed your development? Who got you onto that sort of 70s jag that you are trying to claw your way out of?
I think photo lettering and house industries obviously had a huge impact on that. And Ken Barber has been someone that I've been obsessed with for a very, very long time. Actually, finding the House Industries 10-year book was kind of a pivotal moment for me, for sure. But Ken specifically is, he's just the best American lettering artist, like straight up. There's no shortage of people. Everyone on Future Fonts, I'm absolutely keeping my eye on. Daria Petrova, I love. Inga Plannings, I love. Maria from Contrast Family, I think is a really next level designer, and I'm in awe of her for a whole lot of reasons. Yeah, it also goes out of type quite a bit. I talk ad nauseum about Wolfpack, but I think what they did as an independent band that sold out Madison Square Garden is pretty incredible. So I try and apply a lot of their lessons around a DIY ethos, or basically coming up with your own definition of success and not feeling the need to do things the way that they've always been done, and not going by the book is infinitely inspiring to me, more so than like anyone's work in particular, because that just frees you up to think about things in a way that makes sense for you and maybe doesn't need to make sense for everyone. And before that, I was obsessed with Tyler, the Creator, and Odd Future and stuff like that, who was doing that when they were like 15-year-old kids in LA, and really appreciating how authentic and real it felt for them. So yeah, it's probably the art form I look to the most to just feel something. And Tune Yards is a band that I will always put on when I want to get out of like my drawing habits or lose the muscle memory for a minute and approach things just a little bit differently. That was probably more so when I was like in grad school and stuff like that. But Ginger Root, another artist, Fat Night, these like bands that I love that are really influenced by 70s soul music, 70s and 80s like funk and stuff, but then bring a real contemporary edge to it. Stevie Wonder is probably the musician that, like, all musicians love Stevie Wonder. And I love that he has this song called Contusion, which is just like an instrumental jam for like 8 minutes. And then he has a song called Happy Birthday, which is just, so he's the ultimate reference for having that whole spectrum of stuff for you, stuff for people in your industry that's going to like move things forward, and then stuff that is called Happy Birthday, like that is so amazing and admirable. And no one does it better than Stevie Wonder. What an amazing talent.
And I wonder, there is a certain aspect of sort of David Bowie's songcraft and creativity that was about sort of calculating what would be the next moment that captured people's attention. Whereas with Stevie Wonder, it almost seems like, nope, this is just being creative and being original and constantly stretching my own envelope is who I am.
Yeah.
It's not an act for me. Like, I don't have to try something new. It just happens.
It's not an act, and it's not an act because think at what point that guy didn't need to sell any more records. He was like 18, and then he had this lifetime of music.
Oh, well, let's take that as a segue to another sort of deep cut from your Q&A podcast episode. J.L. Collins and Fuck You Money.
Oh, love J.L. Have you read the book?
I have not read the book.
Oh, it's good. It's good. Whatever. It's not for everyone, but I think it's a really important thing to touch on. Yeah, so J.L. Collins is this guy who's big in the financial independence community, which is something that I got turned on to from my brother Mark, my oldest brother.
It's great to have older brothers.
Especially an older brother like Mark, who I think he kind of understands that my creative life is taken care of. My family life is in a great place. I adore my 2 girls and adore my wife, and that stuff is all good. And he's like, okay, you really need to make sure that your finances are in order because no one's going to do it for you. And also our parents were maybe not the best mentors in that respect. So he has had an awesome career. He's retired now. He retired at 50, which is phenomenal. And he got me into this kind of financial independence early retirement thing, which I think is a very cool thing that I wish kind of more designers were stoked on and aware of. A lot of people say stuff like, oh, I love my job. Why would I want to retire early? And I'm kind of thinking like, how much more would you love your job if you didn't need to make money from it, you know? So retirement is a big goal for me, but maybe not for the reasons you would expect. You know, it's not because I hate my job. I love my job, but I would love to get out of the capitalism rat race in a way and stay in it in a way too. So anyways, J.L. Collins has this book called The Simple Path to Wealth. I swear every book that I've read that's had an amazing impact on me has a terribly cheesy title like that. And J.L. Collins defines fuck you money basically as the amount that's essentially in your savings that allows you to say no thank you to projects. So when a client comes in and they're rude or not treating you well, or not going to give you the money that you're requesting, you can say, no thanks, I'm not going to work on this, and I can afford the luxury of saying no in this way. So you could call it fuck you money, you could call it F you money, you could call it no thank you money, wherever you're at on the cursing spectrum there. But it's a really, really powerful idea that took a while to fully sink in for me. But now I think about it constantly, and it's something that I basically wish for everybody.
So speaking of the customer who's rude to you, do you do custom work or do you do strictly selling your typeface as product at this point?
I've been on a whole spectrum of that. So I started the year saying, I'm not doing any more client work. I got kind of burned out on it and I struggled with it emotionally, to be totally frank. It's a hard thing for me. Like I've never graduated beyond the phase of taking everything personally. It still stings, you know, because I still feel like this is something I'm creating that is coming from my heart in some way. So I was like, I'm done. I'm not doing commercial work anymore, or client work, basically. Just going to focus on retail fonts. Also, because through a combination of direct sales and from my website, which is about 50% of our income, and Adobe fonts, which is about 40% of our income, our needs were met. So I was like, great. I'm so stoked to be at a point where I can just focus on the retail library at this point. And then a project would come in and I'd be like, oh, this one would be actually kind of cool to work on. So then I would quote it and send out the estimate and not get it. And then I'd be like, wow, I just wasted. I should have stuck to my guns, you know, and just stayed on this thing for a little while. So then I just started saying no through, I don't know, like maybe into February up until recently. And then I started talking recently with Matthew Rex as a business advisor. He's someone that came from Adobe fonts and is not there any longer, but then just started working with independent type designers, mostly talking about their business and consulting basically. And he had some good points. And one of them was, you know, it sounds like you're comfortable with focusing on retail. It sounds like that's something that you're totally comfortable with. And that comfort should be a little bit of a red flag to you. Like, I think we should always be doing things that are getting us a little bit out of our comfort zone and trying things differently, never relying too much on any one part of our business. And I was like, okay, that's a solid point. So now I don't immediately say no to everything like I was doing. If it sounds like it's going to be a great fit, then I'll hear them out and actually meet with the client and send an estimate. And if they say no, you've priced too high, I think that's probably best case scenario. And if they say yes, we would like to work with you, I know I didn't price high enough. And but then those projects are really healthy to have every once in a while too. And if it's people that are good to you and good to work with, I think it can absolutely be a great thing. It's an awesome thing that can supplement the income we have from the retail sales as well. So yeah, I'm kind of in this middle ground with it right now, to be honest. I'm not really sure how it's going to play out from here, but I think whenever something comes through that seems like it's a great fit, it's worth entertaining. So sometimes I'll ask people like, how many type designers are you talking to right now? Like, am I one of 8 that you're reaching out to and getting a bunch of different quotes on this? Or am I one of 2 and you actually are really familiar with what we do and how I work, and you think it would be a really, really great fit for you? So in that case, I'm much more likely to quote it. Sometimes I'll get as far as like doing the presentation that I sometimes show clients about how my process works and kind of what you get with a custom typeface and that sort of thing. I did that recently and didn't get the project. And I reached out to them and I was like, hey, I haven't gotten any projects in a while. Like, I've been losing a lot of these things. So would you mind just telling me what was the deciding factor in this decision? Was it money? Was it how I conduct myself professionally? Because I'm pretty casual. I'm not trying to be super professional. Was it my presentation, or was it my library, whatever? And he was like, oh, actually, in your presentation, you talked a lot about working off of pencil sketches and trying to create something from scratch. And I think we are looking for more of a revival sort of thing. And I was like, great, that's a fantastic answer. And yeah, I'm really happy that you didn't go with me in that case, because it probably would have been bad for both of us.
Yep, you saved us both some time.
Exactly. So I do have a love-hate relationship with client work. Like, it's pretty complicated right now, but I haven't written it off completely.
Well, I'm pleased that we'll get to see more coming out from Ohno that's not custom work, because that custom work sometimes gets hidden under a rock. It's more it's more fun to see the incredible variety and vitality of the stuff that you've made. And I got to say again, so the impetus for asking you to talk was about just the joy and beauty of the work that you've made. And I see now, after having talked to you, it's a great expression of who you are as a human being. So thanks so much for taking the time to talk.
Totally my pleasure. Thank you so much for reaching out. It's great to connect with you. And yeah, you said a lot of really nice things about me and my work. So I appreciate them all.
Take care, James.
James is always up to some kind of shenanigans, so keep up with what he's doing at ohnotype.co. And keep an eye out for his book, The Ohno Book, A Serious Guide to Irreverent Type Design, which will be released October 14th. Creative Characters is brought to you by Monotype. It's produced by Christopher Olin and Mia Sullivan. We'll be back with more episodes soon. Until then, take care.